Right, so welcome to the presentation called Agile Used to Be Really Cool. I really think that there was this time that it was the hottest topic ever. Everyone was talking about Agile, Scrum, different practices, extreme programming, the greatest thing ever. But this talk is not about Agile. That's a surprise, right? Well, what is this talk about? Well, it's a bit weird. I'm going to talk about trains or books for parents, so that's probably something that you haven't seen so far, but I'm going ahead of myself. So, for starters, my name is Wojtek Erbetowski. Feel free to comment anything you want via Twitter, or just use Slido to post questions. That would be great for you. Okay, so the talk is actually more about what happens if you actually have adopted Agile, and it's working great for you. And you want to actually keep improving, keep developing yourself, your team, being better, and better. And there are several topics and mainstreams for different practices. I don't want to actually compare them and go through all of them. I have chosen to actually tell you my story. And several most important things, well, definitely most important for me for the last several years. Great. So, starting with Agile Manifesto, who of you is not working or haven't been working on Agile team here? Okay. And who of you haven't ever seen Agile Manifesto? Oh, not many. Great. Because I don't want to go too deep in that. For those who are not familiar with that, well, basically it just sounds like several very obvious things, which is the biggest win of Agile ever, that nowadays it just seems obvious, all of them. And they weren't obvious 15 years ago when Agile Manifesto was first written, right? So the main idea of the document is that we basically value more these things on the left than values on the right. For instance, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Well, it seems very obvious that we as people communicate way more efficient when we just talk to each other. We have the whole body language, mimic, everything to express ourselves, the whole energy, the voice level. And if we just try to switch to the process, to documents, we lose a lot from that. Great. So my story. And my life changed a lot. Last year, my second son was born. It actually changed almost everything. I have changed my job, which was a huge thing for me. After 4.5 years, went to a new job. Another thing that I found especially interesting is how my relationship with my wife changed over that time. And I always found that in strong teams, teams in companies, it's always great when you have these different challenges, and it even actually gets teams together better and stronger, right? If you're really strong, this huge obstacle just comes and crashes on your chest, and you even feel better with that, right? But for weak teams and for teams with difficulties, obstacles actually can even kill them, right? But if you have many of them, you can get better, and improve. And this is what happened with my relationship, actually. The whole context, and we had lots of different problems in the same time, more conflict situations. And if your environment changes, you probably have only one smart thing you can do. You can adapt. But in order to be able to adapt, you probably need to learn something new, because the whole knowledge you had, or most of it, is already obsolete. It was for something else. So I started learning and read a lot of different books and books for parents as well. And then I got this book, right? The title wasn't like very interesting for me in the beginning, but the guy seems to be pretty famous, so I just ran that. And the fun fact is actually I find that the best management book I've ever read so far. And it's not about management, right? It's about raising your children. I actually learned that when I was a child and teenager, I was taught many different anti-patterns for communicating with people, for speaking with other adults. And now I actually understood that I have to unlearn what I have already understood and learn new ways to communicate. And there is this great concept in that book called the personal language, actually treating yourself as the center for all of the things that you say, that you feel, not judging anything, but more sharing how you feel about that. For instance, actually about children, I don't think that comes from the book, I just made it up. When your child comes and you see a new t-shirt there, and you want to look, hey, you look pretty, you look great in that. It's pretty nice to share that, but there's just one thing happening right there. If you keep acting like that, then you actually make this impression that you are the oracle, you are the one to decide whether this child looks good or bad, not the child himself. Well, on the other hand, you could just, or as Anna shared in the keynote in the parallel universe, you could probably say that a bit differently. You could say, I like this t-shirt. I think that you look nice. And this makes a huge difference. But something more from our world. Another example could be code reviews. And you can see that often, not only in open source, because it's public and it's easy to see, but even in your own team, often you can actually make someone feel very bad about him or herself. For instance, you actually read a little code, someone, I don't know, let's say Peter just created this really cool feature. And you're going through the code, and there's a function that you just spent 10 minutes reading, and you had a problem with that, so you passed a command like, that's a really unreadable code. And Peter right here just says, what he hears in the first moment is just like, I write unreadable code, which obviously, in my opinion, is not true. So there's an argument, right? No, maybe it's your problem. Maybe you don't understand something, right? And there's a conflict situation right there. But what happens if you actually focus on yourself when you're saying that, and you go with, it was really difficult for me reading that code? How can you argue with that? You can't. Someone just shared his feeling, right? And this is very easy because now you can focus on, okay, so how can we make it easier for you to read, right? What can we change there? Great. As I think of many teams I've been working with so far, the greatest of them, and I'm pretty sure that most of you, if you remember one pretty efficient and happy team you've been working on, that had this one common thing. They were very motivated. And not motivated always to like the company goal or running the business or something like that. Sometimes it was like just the perfection of the code, using TDD or have everything tested or top quality, but they had their own motivation. Not their salary, not their manager coming to meeting and saying, all right, guys, we're going to do it. I know you can do it. Yes. It never works, right? They're intrinsically, or maybe you just feel motivated right now. Hope so. Well, so there's this great book called Drive. And the most important part, actually, it says that extrinsic motivation, which comes from outside of yourself, it's pretty great, but only when there is very little creativity required. And I like to think that software development actually needs a lot of creativity, right? And there are several very simple research that's showing when there's some creativity and space required for you to think, then then actually money and extrinsic things actually stops you from thinking about that. What motivates you is things you feel inside. And he actually cites several books. There are many other motivators, but he chosen three that he found the most important. So that's a great place to start. If you think about yourself and your team, there are just 3 points to think about. First is autonomy. So actually, autonomy means that you can influence things that you are working on. Can you decide on how do you code this thing, right? Or why do we do that? Or another thing. So you just want to be able to decide in your own small environment about your work. Another one, when actually autonomy is satisfied, there's a mastery. As a beginner, you want to actually feel that you are learning, developing. You really need a feedback that this is happening, because it's very easy to think that you're not developing, that you're really lame. When you're an expert, this is very important, maybe not how much you still learn, but how good is something that you work on. Can you do your best here in this job, in this project? So think that for a moment that two of them are satisfied, and then there comes the purpose. Is actually everything that I do and work on actually has some meaning to someone. And it doesn't actually have to be fighting cancer, but even if you're working on internal tool for another person or people in your company, then it's really important that you know that this is helping someone. Someone's life is actually better and easier because you work there. Right. One of the topics I actually misunderstood for a very long time is trust. So I think of that trust used to be something like that for me. Just imagine that your friend comes to you and says, like, okay, I was thinking about that, and the only solution is we have to go to MongoDB. Okay, so you're not a fan of MongoDB, right? But if you want to trust that person, then you should probably let her go with that, right? Well, I don't think that anymore, right? So I don't think that trust means that you actually let someone do what he or she wants. You have the right to disagree every time, but trust for me means that I think about several things at the moment. First of all, I think you're not lying to me, that you honestly think that. And the other thing is that you want something good for our team and company, and this is your motivation. So if you're tell me anything, and I trust you day to day, I just believe that what you just said is true from your perspective. It's very important. Right, self-esteem is, these topics, just you can have the whole team with great communication skills, and it's very hard to achieve, but sometimes you need to hire someone. And then you want probably a person that has this open mind and is open for feedback. And actually what you're looking for is self-esteem. This is something that someone is a source of his or she's own value. And it's very easy to give some feedback because that person gets offended very, very hard. The problem is how to hire for self-esteem. And well, the short answer is I have no idea, no clue. But what we do at Growbots, part of our hiring process, we send a task, a coding task to a candidate. And then she or he comes and presents the idea. We do live code review, discussing different topics. So we are sharing our feedback and some of the things that we didn't like in that solution as well. Well, it gives us some idea. It's not perfect, but something to start with. Right. Actually, I'm gonna. This is The Stack Overflow question, I think definitely the most upvoted answer on Stack Overflow so far, and by far. And I'm going to have a flash talk about that after this talk. But think about this situation. When 200 years ago, we had railways for a long, long distance, and absolutely no long-distance communication, like radio communication, telephones, anything like that, yet. So when you wanted to go somewhere in the train, and then at some point of time you had a switch, you had a branch, and you needed to decide which way to go, you had to go with this huge train, you had to stop that, going like huge, massive train. It takes several hundred meters or a kilometer to stop, and then you're telling the operator where do you want to go, and then you start over. So think about for a moment that is there any other option? Well, not really, to communicate. But over time, operators already knew at what day of week it is, what time it is. So probably this train is going to, I don't know, I know already where. Well, it's not every time. So what happens, actually, operators started just choosing the route for the train, and train didn't stop. So if he went in the correct direction, that was great, right? He just kept moving on. If they chosen the wrong direction, then the train had to stop, go all the way back, change the switch, and go in the right direction. So that sounds very inefficient, right? But if it happens, if it's not very often, then the whole process as such is very, very efficient. And they actually started doing that everywhere. So my question is actually, as a team, as an organization, what are you optimized for? Your algorithm, right? So I had this idea that most of the processes and things actually are secured for not making mistakes, but they keep slowing you down every time to catch that, right? Several topics. First, days off. In many companies, you have to actually go to someone to accept your vacation. So that someone, your boss, let's say, actually has to understand who are you working with. Okay, that's your team, basically. So no one else is taking vacation on that time, so that's great. But I know already that you've been doing some side project for another person in the company. So I just want to check that as well. But what I haven't thought about is that you had another side project, because I didn't know that, because I don't know all of your work. And then I can make a mistake easily. Who's the best person to decide in that problem, right? Who knows who has the most information about my work, my daily work? Well, I do. So if you have a system that everyone can just take vacation whenever he or she wants, and it's important that everyone understand they need to discuss that, then that works perfectly great. Until you meet someone who just doesn't give a about the company, right? But then think about that train. Then you have to stop, go all the way back. It's less efficient, definitely, than if some manager would accept in that particular case, but you are gaining on the whole process every single day. Another thing is coming from our company. That's our Kanban board from several months ago. And Kanban has this great thing about limiting work in progress, which actually means that you should not be working on too many things on the same time. You actually should limit this to as little as possible so you can focus on that. So we started with limits, and I'm a huge fan of limiting the work, but the problem is actually that everyone just focus on these numbers. Okay, I have 2 more to go. And that's not the most important part. The important part is actually that you understand that it's better for you and for everyone that you just have one thing open, and you can focus on that. And that's easier for you. So then, actually, we've made like a week just working on one thing at a time until it was done, which was a very great, very good exercise for us. And then you can see this really small board on this screen, but there are no written limits there anymore. And this is a team of 15 people working in parallel, and there are like less than 15 cards on the whole board. This is great because now the team, the people, have become the rule because they understood what it gives them. Not that there's a number showing them how to do that. Well, we've talked about vacation. How about salary? Like, who's the best person to understand how good you are? How helpful you are, right? Are you better or worse than your colleagues? That's actually sounds pretty crazy. But I would love to work at some point of time in a company, in a team, that you can decide. And everyone feels good about that because they know that you're not malicious in that behavior. And there's this great book, The Decision Maker. There's a fake story, but based on several different stories. Dennis, the author, writes about a company that actually moves from classical top-down hierarchy to a company that is driven by decisions by everyone who's actually involved in that part. So you can make a decision for everything that you are working on, no matter how long you are in the company or what role do you have, what position in the company. If it concerns you, then you are the decision maker. Great book, I highly recommend it. Right, the last thing is that after reading so many things and learning so many great things, it seemed impossible for me to talk and behave like that on a daily basis, because I just had my roots of thinking, of responding there, right? It felt so unnatural responding like that. So a great thing I've discovered at some point of time was meditation, particularly mindfulness meditation, which is a great practice for one single thing, which actually creates this space, lets you create this little space between what you think of when someone says something or something happens to you, between you doing or responding to that. So it makes a change from reacting to something to be able to respond in a way. So I think that you've never had the occasion, or probably most of you, but I want to ask you to actually practice that with me, practice mindfulness meditation for just 1 minute. And here are the rules. The practice goes like this. You focus on your breath, like air coming into your lung, chest expands, right, or stomach, and then it goes the other way. And you just think about that. But what happens pretty quickly is just you're going to think about that like, okay, I'm breathing in, breathing out. Oh, I think that's a really cool talk, right? Oh, well, that was a thought. I just thought about something, so I got to go back to the breath. Okay, I'm breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. It's going really well. Just thought about how good is this, right now. So I'm just coming back to the breath. That's the only important thing for me right now, okay? If you feel like that, you can close your eyes. It always helps me. I have a timer right here. So starting now, 1 minute, just think about your breath. Every time you think about something, just let it go and gently go back to your breath. Okay. Now you can go back to the room. Right, so who haven't thought about anything, haven't been thinking about anything for 1 minute? Great, we have several people. You're awesome. I admire you, seriously. That's very difficult for me. And who had just one thought? 2 or more? For the most of the room. That was me as well, yeah, definitely. So that was probably, for some of you, that might have been the longest time this year or several years that you tried not to think about something. That there's no break for your brain. So if you want to try, definitely I can recommend that practice do that over and over again. That's how simple it is. Right, I hope you enjoyed the talk. If you have any questions, just go ahead, use Slido, and thank you very much.
Okay, so there's one question. What do you think of Pomodoro approach?
Oh, the Pomodoro approach. Well, thanks for that question, most of all. Well, I've been using Pomodoro for a really long time. I find that very, very useful. That's a great practice. For those of you who don't know the practice, well, probably the most basic rule is that you start a timer for 25 minutes, and then you just focus on a single task that you've picked for yourself for that time. And then after the time is finished, then you can have a short break and go to another task for another 25 minutes, right? There are many things like Kanban actually is team-oriented or just people-oriented tool, and Pomodoro often is problematic because it's just like for one person to use. And teams often find that difficult to work in Pomodoro because people that have different cycles, and it's hard to communicate and talk. But I've heard at least 2 stories about teams that started an iteration together. That they said, okay, now we're going to have a coffee, and then next, bam, 25 minutes, no talking. Everyone works on his or her thing. That's it. So, yeah, that's my opinion.
Do you sometimes use it? Or
yeah, I used to actually work that every day. My work changed a lot. I'm barely developing at all right now. And now this is very, very difficult for me because I have a lot of distractions. So I'm not using Pomodoro lately. But I used to actually work like that every day.
Do you meditate in the office during the day?
Yeah, actually lately we've started a group that everyone is welcome there to come once a week and meditate together. So yeah, definitely. In the beginning, in the previous company, it felt so awkward to meditate in the company, so I just put headphones on my head and went to the bathroom. I knew no one's going to distract me there, so I just locked myself in and tried to meditate for 10 minutes. That's it, right? But many people find that okay to meditate in the morning if that's really hard for you to do that in the office.
Interesting. Any other questions?